Hey, John.
Hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. The continued good weather is unbelievable.
It is glorious here in Oklahoma City, though. It was
Yeah,
what, 85 degrees at like 7 o'clock
yeah,
this morning, so it's picking up here. But still, it's we had some rain yesterday. If you go
yeah.
outside my front door, you see it in the film. Me walking through, by my yard or whatever. You can hear the grass growing. I have to
Wow.
by the third day after I've cut the lawn. I cut it pretty low. um, it's already a mess. My neighbor's looking at me like it's time, John. You need to cut your lawn again. So I got my lawnmower right here. You
There
can't
we
see it.
are.
My lawnmower is right over here.
Well,
Run the
I've
day
got
up.
I've got rabbits around here, and they seem to keep it down pretty well.
I don't think my dog Guido would like the rabbits in the yard, but
So, what are we talking about today?
oh, we're talking about wow, uh, silkworm, the silkworm,
Okay.
and an epithet for it. What do you say? I would say, if not the best Robert Galbraith novel, a distinction I think has to go to Troubled Blood. I think it's the most important
Yeah.
Cormoran Strike novel, by a good distance, because in it, Rowling tells us not only her lake and shed distinction, pretty upfront, without using the metaphor of lake
Okay.
and shed. We get why Rowling writes and what she's about. This is the entire metafictional book. It's very difficult to overestimate the importance of the silkworm. Maybe it should be read first, even though that throws off the entire structural understanding of the series, because it's the novel, the alpha point of this entire series. Maybe of really Rowling's apologetic for everything that she does as a writer. Have I oversold this, Nick?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think in terms of the lake perspective, it's important because this is her world. This is where she lives. So I'm not going back to Tut's Hill. I'm not going to Portugal or France or Essex. This is where she is. This is where she is now.
But remember, she said that she conceived this novel 7 or 8 years before she wrote it. Where does that put
Yeah.
us?
So this was published in 2014, in the summer of 2014. So she would have been well into writing it in the summer of 2013. And there's some caveats for that because there's a lot going on in this period. So between the publication of Cuckoo's Calling, the outing of Robert Galbraith, and the publication of The Silkworm, the Cursed Child was announced. The deal has been struck for Fantastic Beasts. And it's not that long after publication of The Silkworm that it's announced that that series of films were going to be a trilogy, and J.K. Rowling was going to be writing the script. So there's a lot going on. But I would say the very latest that she was seriously, she'd already planned she'd be into writing it, would be the summer of 2013.
I think you got your numbers mixed up, because she publishes it in 2014, and
Yeah.
she said she had the idea 7 or 8 years before she wrote it. So she was
Yes.
writing it at the latest she could be writing it is 2013, which is a
Yes.
madhouse time in her life.
So it would be 8 years before that.
So now we're talking about, Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah.
We're talking about 2005 territory.
Yeah.
She has this germ of a novel about novels,
Yes.
and really what she's about. That as finally the Hogwarts saga is coming to a close, and she's had 2 children with her new husband. She has a family. They're having their issues, but they seem to be resolving them. And I think she has an epiphany about really what her story is about. And she has this idea of a detective series that is not going to be a police procedural because she wants to focus on this relationship. And that relationship, as you've discussed, is really the centerpiece of the entire series.
Yeah. And I think when I say she's writing about her world, really, we're talking about her world 2003 and before. This isn't her world anymore. She's too big. She dwarfs it, you know? J.K. Rowling can't just wander into a launch party. She tried it once, so she's joined the Crime Writers Association, and a few of her books have been up for awards for the Crime Writers Association. And for the first one, she actually went to the Crime Writers Awards dinner. Oh, and she probably had a good time, but she's never been back.
Yeah,
because pretty much the only coverage that awards had, even though she didn't win an award, was J.K. Rowling was there.
Yeah, that end. There's a secret. Yeah, one of her favorite outings is to go to see a specific rock band in Edinburgh. Was it called the Fat Boys or the Fat Cops or something?
Fat Cops.
Fat Cops, and she apparently has a thing for the pianist in the band.
Yeah, I hear they're quite close.
Neil Murray, her slow finger 45 is the pianist in the band, and apparently they have a laugh riot. They probably have a great time when they perform publicly, and Rowling sells T-shirts and is there. I don't know what kind of venues they actually play in, but can you imagine if that was very well known?
Yeah.
Anytime the Fat Cops would appear, the place would be overrun.
Yes.
And that would be overrun with, the security would have to be unreal now. I mean, what a life. As you said, this was her life. If she did conceive the story in 2005, this is at peak Pottermania, where she dwarfs all of the writers inside this book.
Yeah.
Owen Quine.
Yeah.
What's the name of the nasty author that
Michael Fancourt with the overlarge head.
Michael Fancourt, yeah, the one who says that women can't be novelists.
That's right.
Which actually is an important point, because I think at one point, at least in Rowling's life, she believed it.
Yeah.
And she made some bad decisions. Anyway, what's your lake point going to be with the Silkworm?
Yeah. So as I say, this is where she is. This is what she does. It's tricky. It's tricky to put a specific lake point, because although this is where she was, we would only know about direct parallels if people wrote about it. And it's one of the unspoken things that writers don't write about their own publishing journey so much, because they want to get published again. So although it's I find it easy to believe that parties at a publishing house would be a hotbed of gossip. We don't get that described very frequently. There is a book by UK author Amanda Craig. And the people described in that book about publishing seem to be fairly evenly split between those who sued and those who wanted to claim that they were characters in that book. But that really is a publishing rarity. So what I'd like to choose from the Lake book is a real life example of an author putting their snark into print through their fiction. But before
because that's what Quine does, or
yes.
Tassel does in lieu of Quine. I mean, and Fancourt does as well. I mean, this is yes. Okay.
Yeah. So authors, I guess, if we are going to stereotype them, them, they do have a propensity to want to put their grudges into print. So I have an example of an author who has done that with J.K. Rowling in their sites. But before I get onto that, I'm quite excited. So this is an important book, as you say, John. This was in terms of her idea for one of the Strike series. This was, she says, the first idea she had. So it is an important book. So I always pay attention to the acknowledgements. I always pay attention to the dedication. And there is a dedication that has been bothering me for a number of years. So the dedication to Silkworm is to Jenkins, without whom, ... he knows the rest. Now, maddeningly, I don't know of a single Jenkins that is associated with J.K. Rowling. It is an absurdly common name, geographically clustered
in
around
the UK,
in the UK and around the English Welsh border. So it's an English Welsh border name. But I think I may have had a clue. This is not definitive, but I think I've got a clue. So, as you know, John, recently I've been reading, after a brief interruption, Little Women. I read the first chapter of Little Women, recalled that you'd mentioned that it follows parallels from Pilgrim's Progress. Of course, they basically lay out in the first chapter, we're going to be paralleling Pilgrim's Progress. So I went back and read that first.
I don't get any credit for that, Nick.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely, you do. So in the UK, the series of Little Women books is 4 books. So I think in the US, what we call in the UK Little Women and Good Wives described as a single book, Little Women. And then you have Little Men and Jo's Boys. So to make it all the way through to Jo's Boys, you've got to be pretty invested, I think, in Jo March as a character, because it's not until that book that she becomes a successful author. And there's some great parallels in that book. You know, a successful author annoyed by the fandom, constantly bothered by the press. You know, there's some great parallels. But I was stopped short by a passage in there, and Jo March, Aunt Jo, is talking about one of her nephews, John Demijohn, who has decided to become a reporter. And it says, Aunt Jo raged when she found there was to be a reporter in the family and called him Jenkins on the spot.
Uh-oh.
And she uses that term for Demi 3 times in Jo's Boys, Jenkins, which means absolutely nothing to me, but without any explanation. So it would have meant something to the reader at the time. And I feel certain that whenever Jo March, Jo Rowling read that, she would have felt the same. You can't let it go and move away until you find out what she meant by Jenkins. So I did. So looking at online dictionaries, in the 1860s and 1880s, the term Jenkins borrowed from a British expression for a windy and obsequious society reporter, and it was widely used in the US as a derisive term for journalists whose prose was overrich and whose prying was viewed as excessive. So
Rowling has a friend who's a Jenkins?
Well, now recently Rowling has tweeted that she can't understand why anyone needs to use all their fingers to count their friends.
We've had this conversation.
We've had this conversation. So narrowing down her circle of acquaintances to a very tight fold, I think there is a journalist who Rowling would count as a friend.
Wow.
And he's a chap called Ewan McCall. He has been on holiday with J.K. Rowling on her yacht. He trained as a tabloid journalist in Glasgow, and now he works He writes for the Scotsman, the Scottish Daily Mail, and the Mail on Sunday. And I think Ewan helped Rowling because, as you say, she hasn't got any close friends or many acquaintances who are tabloid journalists.
I mean, when she told on the open book door, she was asked, "What advice do you have for your young readers?" And she said, "Don't trust the government or the media." Do you have any doubt who she was thinking about when she said the media?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and to find out that she has a friend in the crowd, that is hilarious.
Yeah.
And that you found Jenkins inside Louisa May Alcott. Nick, I'm gonna put my hat on here, Nick. I'm gonna put my hat on so that I may. Oh, I got it on backwards. I'm gonna put my hat on so I can take my hat off and say, "Well done, well done."
It's not definitive, but
oh, come on.
I think we've got that opening scene with Culpeper, who appears a few times in the books, and they talk about tabloid journalism. I think that's come from Ewan.
That's so funny. Anyway, congratulations. That is a great find. That is a bullseye. That's magnificent. We're supposed to be reviewing stuff here. You're bringing up new stuff. You better write this up as a separate post so people can refer to it. You know, they're gonna tag this conversation and say, "Go to 7 minutes and 40 seconds to hear Nick talk about it." What a find! This is great. I'm gonna continue to expand your reading list and just see what you get out of this. Jenkins, wow, that's magnificent. All right, wow. How do you top that? Was that it? Was that the late?
Well, no. So I was going to talk briefly about literary snark. So I posted an article on the Substack a while ago about, it's titled "The King's Canary," and it had two parts. I'm going to talk about the second part, not the Dylan Thomas parody. This is a satire by a lady named Joanne Harris, influential figure in the UK literary circles. She wrote Chocolate, or Chocolat, which was a wildly successful bestseller, both sides of the Atlantic. It was made into a film that did incredibly well and made her name as an author. From 2020, she was chairman of the Society of Authors, which is in the UK is sort of like a trade union for authors and writers.
Oh no!
Oh yeah. So she published a book shortly before she became chairman of the Society of Authors, called Honeycomb, and it's a series of short stories. And within that book, there was a short story called The King's Canary. And that was a very clear, to me at least, satire of J.K. Rowling, and not, as published in the book, not a particularly kind one either. So the heroine of the story, the King's Canary, is described as a singer who was a poor woman, sings for some pennies, but mainly for love. Although she wasn't a very good singer, particularly, the children liked her. The king noticed her, wanted her to sing to his children, got her up to the castle, showered her with jewels and fine clothes, said she couldn't sing in the marketplace anymore, it's too dangerous for her. She sang from the battlements. The kids were upset because they couldn't get close to her. Lots of adults were jeering. And eventually, because she was unhappy, she found an old dress, dressed herself up, went into the marketplace pretending to be somebody else and sang again. For pennies, but mainly for love. And then somebody pulled back the hood of her clothes and recognized her and shouted, "That's not the king's canary, it's the king's cuckoo," and chased her back to the castle, and she never sang again. At least to me, that was a clear and not particularly well meant satire of Rowling publishing under the Galbraith pseudonym. Now, I managed to trace back, as I document in the article, to where she originally posted it, and she actually posted it as a blog post only a few weeks after the news broke that Galbraith had been unmasked. And there was, unlike in the short story book, there was no preamble. But on the blog there was. So it's on the blog she explains, this is about J.K. Rowling. This is my reaction to the news. Now she said it's a cautionary tale of being too successful, and she explains that she means it kindly. And perhaps I could give her the benefit of the doubt. But after she becomes the Society of Authors, so Honeycomb's now been published, she publishes a new short story called How the Canary Lost Her Soul. And this is a really very spiteful satire about how the King's Canary became essentially consumed by hate and hated by everybody. Yeah. Now, Joanne Harris herself has claimed more than once that she's never attacked J.K. Rowling. Now, you can say satire
with a stick, with a gun, with a knife, okay.
I would say satire has to be a little bit more masked than that if it wasn't going to be a direct attack. She has been accused in the papers of not supporting people who are gender critical. She's been accused of trivializing death threats that J.K. Rowling has achieved.
The Salman Rushdie, there's a Salman Rushdie incident, right?
That's right. And then she instituted a Twitter poll saying, how many people have been threatened, and it was a little bit trivializing. But yeah, so where she's really got her venom out is in her fiction.
Now, obviously, that post dates the Silkworm.
Yes,
but is a marvelous, for instance, of this kind of thing. But Rowling, if the Canary doesn't participate in the feud,
no.
If Michael Fancourt really just totally forgot about Owen Klein, just dismissed him, or whatever, instead of trying to ruin him and writing about their shared agonies together with at the flat dedicated to their writing. Yeah, but it's the world of publishing. There's some comments in Silkworm about how novelists, Michael Fancourt, I think, says, if you want friends and camaraderie, join the army.
Yeah.
If you really want to kill people, become a novelist. That's yeah. Wow. Okay, Nick. There's no way I don't know. I'm gonna try to top that. Okay. How do I top that? I gotta back up what I said in terms of this being a touchstone novel, an essential novel for serious readers of J.K. Rowling, Robert Galbraith, Joe Murray, to really understand. And that's because this novel is a novel about novelists writing and reading. It's Rowling's most explicitly literary story. And though it's the second book in the series, as we've said, she said it was the first conceived of all the stories. And it's something of a touchstone for Rowling's thoughts about writing. I mean, she said just flat out in this interview, it's a novel about novels with another novel inside of it. And I would add to that, by the age's most important novelist. This is metafictional on steroids. Now, we talked a little bit about parallel series idea when we got to Prisoner of Azkaban, but the Silkworm-like Chamber of Secrets seems to be largely about how to read a book. And it features a book within the book whose characters teach the reader by their examples of what keys you need to understand what the book is about. I mean, seriously, just think about it. The Bombyx Mori, which means the Silkworm, is the book that Strike and everyone is reading, trying to figure out who the murderer is. So they're reading a book with the same title as the book you're reading, and their successes and failures should be pointers to you as to how you should be reading the book and thinking about this, right? She actually has, Cormoran used the word key as in unlocking the meaning in chapter 28. So this isn't just my little hobby horse, right? I mean, a quick explanation of the Silkworm's major plot points in case you haven't read this book in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it's funny, we're reviewing all these books and it's as if, I mean, people that are reading the books, I guess, can come and they can Google this stuff and find us and have some fun doing that stuff. But people that are just coming to this series and actually watching this thing, there are several of you out there. Hello, you know, I should say there are hundreds of you out there. Hi, all of you that haven't read that book recently. So let me go through this, right? The wife of a semi-famous literary novelist hires Cormoran Strike to find her husband. This is Owen Quine. He is known to run away for a holiday, and she needs his help with their mentally handicapped daughter, age 24. One of the, you know, really one of the greatest home scenes is that family. It turns out the husband has just finished writing a not very opaque allegory of his life's journey as a Gothic fairy tale. You mentioned Pilgrim's Progress. This is a grisly Pilgrim's Progress. It's called Bombyx Mori, which we're told is the Latin name for a silkworm. Robin explains a silkworm. That's Strike. Yeah, you know what? I always thought they were like spiders spinning their webs. But you know how they get silk from the worms? Can't say I do. But put that in a Cornish London accent. They boil them, said Robin. Boil them alive so they don't damage their cocoons by bursting out of them. It's the cocoons that are made of silk. Not very nice, really, is it? Lead character in the author's autobiographical allegory is named Bombyx Mori. You know, it's a hero's journey story, transparency, told in pornographic and shocking imagery of his relationship with his wife, his publisher, his agent, his editor, and various lovers, and at least one dependent. Bombyx Mori does not end well. The 7 allegorical figures, all of whom are either parasites or afraid of his artistic genius, wind up cooking and eating him for dinner at a table, you guessed it, set for 7, right? 7. Cormoran and Robin's task is to figure out which of the 7 people depicted had the means and opportunity to kill the author of this libelous history, in which all their crimes and nastiness are spelled out in not very opaque story shapes, by figuring out the key to the work, and hence that use in the story. Now, I read this the first time, Nick, and this is one of those things that you can boast about with your friends, but you shouldn't boast about in public because everybody will roll their eyeballs. But when I was reading the book and I got to the halfway point, I think it was like chapter 28, I figured out who killed, you know, the silkworm. Okay. I knew that it was Liz Tassel. You know, I thought it was either the literary agent or her 2 assistants, you know, and I got some of that right or wrong. But the reason that I knew that, I'll talk about that. The key that Cormoran talks about, repetition and images in Bombyx Mori of scenes and events in previous books, suggested that the author didn't even write the book, but that the agent had as his grand exit, complete with literary inspired murder. I didn't get all of the motivations right, but wow, I drilled Liz Tassel at the halfway point. Now, anybody reading that post now says, how do we know he didn't just go to the finish? And you know, you don't. So this is something you should just share between friends. And I'm sharing it with you. Okay. This is like the Hermione John Granger, you know. He's like, there's no way to talk about that without looking like a real Gilderoy. But anyway, I should have guessed that it wasn't the author's wife, which would have meant that there were two mysteries in a row in which the detective's client does the deed. Yeah, that was kind of like it can't be who it was. Uh, what is the story really about, though? I mean, we've got I just gave you I just spoiled the finish for all you people who haven't read the Silkworm, and I've given you the Amazon synopsis in a way. As a book within a book, it's important not to neglect the obvious. The Silkworm is the title of both the unpublished manuscript and the Cormoran Strike mystery that we're reading. The characters are reading a book at the same time that we are. It's not a silly assumption to speculate that what the interior book is about is what the exterior back, the one with the codex in our hand or on your little pad there, Nick, is about at the same time. All the novelists in the book write about themselves, either their wish fulfillment fantasies or their real world nightmares written out as barely closeted fictions. As Robin's explanation of the Silkworm suggests, this is the agony of the novelist. The art or product of the Silkworm, she tells us, is not like the web of a spider, which is made from the insect's substance, but is sufficiently separate that the destruction of the art is not the end of its creator. Right? The silkworm dies in its cocoon, its excretion of its substance in which the worm is hidden so the world can enjoy its beautiful art. Rowling Galbraith is telling us that the novels are best understood in light of the author's autobiography, in other words. This is her first big lake pitch, that just as the silkworm dies in order for there to be silk, so an author's life essence is distilled into his or her fiction. Hence the neurotic quality of literary lives. The author and man seemingly murdered in the novel, in other words, as likely as not, whether he wrote the book in question or not, he didn't, wanted to die the way he does in the Silkworm manuscript because that is the way he believes that writers live. The original book that they found in Tassel's freezer was called Bombyx Mori. So there are at least 4 stories going on inside the Silkworm, and this was obvious from the very start. The one I'm most interested in, I think everybody else is the Cormoran B Strike, Robin, Venetia, Alcott romance, and how each is struggling to get over the first loves of their lives. In the second book, Strike is still really in Charlotte Campbell Ross agonies, and Robin is really coming to understand that Matt Cunliffe is a jerk. We only get this along the way of solving the mystery, but it's the real main event and the alchemical point of the work. Their transformation is in process here. The mystery itself is the next book, Who Killed or Assisted in the Literary Suicide of Owen Quine, is a wonderful page turner and well worth the cost of admission. I mean, it's really a fascinating book, and why wouldn't it be? Rowling knows this world of publishers and publishing, so it's written on an intimate and fun basis. This is the send up part of it, the satire part of it. And there's the send up of the London literary scene, the incestuous, demeaning, uncharitable, and backbiting world of agents, publishers, authors, and hangers on. It is not a pretty picture. It's funny, but it's not a pretty picture that we're given in the course of the story. And no doubt, it's getting even and settling scores is the point of the story within the story. So Rowling, I'm sure, is scoring points on people known and unknown along the way. Maybe that will be in the critical biography. The people will say, I was in the Silkworm. But her asides about the illegality of tapping phones and Cormoran's speculation about his dead author's plan to publicize his new book with scandal sounds quite a bit like what folks were saying about the whole hidden identity ploy that Rowling used with the Galbraith pseudonym. And this passage really highlighted that for me. When you stop and think about it, said Strike, it's not a bad business plan for an egotistical, thin-skinned man who's hardly selling any books. Kick off as much trouble as you can, get the book gossiped about all over London, threats of legal action, loads of people upset, veiled revelations about a famous author, and then disappear where the writs can't find you, and before anyone can stop you, put it out as an ebook. Now, I don't know about you, Nick, but when I read that passage, I fell out my chair laughing, right? Yeah, I like to think that Rowling is a woman of self-reflection. She's demonstrated that, I think, pretty conclusively. And I like to think, too, it's not unlikely that she is capable of describing herself in good humor here, as her critics have done with some bitterness, as both devilishly mercantile, creating the whole revelation of the Galbraith pseudonym kerfuffle to boost sales of Calling before the book went to paperback, and more to the point, as egotistical and thin-skinned. Cormoran describes another nouveau-rich maven as being the sort of having that little pocket of insecurity just beneath the smooth surface that made them overcompensate and sometimes overreach. That sounds like an epiphany she might have had looking in the mirror, right? A silkworm's cocoon, beautiful, and the painted author concealed within it. And that is the fourth book that I think Rowling is writing for the serious reader. The story of what it's like to be a famous writer who is dying in her craft every day in a world that is insensitive to the self-investment and sacrifices behind the accomplishment. Now, if we're right that Rowling was plotting these books from 2005, really, until 2012, 2013, she's really laid this thing out. This has been at least as big a deal in her life as Harry Potter. It hasn't had the sales and the global fame and stuff like that. But she's as invested as in this series as she has been in Harry Potter, and maybe will be her greater legacy. It's certainly already longer than the Harry Potter series. The painful pictures of women that Rowling is, and might have been, especially the red-headed writer Kathryn Kent, who is aged well beyond her years, are wonderful studies in self-awareness, I suspect, and to be admired for that, in addition to their story content. Okay, and that's really I want to jump right into that point as my closing. I've talked a lot about these. Sorry, Nick, I've been doing your job. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of Lake stuff there, but because I think she is saying, hey, the silkworm, you got to get the lake element of that. I don't know if there's any silkworms out there in your Welsh lake, but I mean this is maybe I should be looking for them in my shed here. That would be a grace, wouldn't it? Daddy longlegs and sprickets and silkworms. Anyway, in chapter 10 of the Silkworm, they're talking to me, Nick. Robin and Cormoran are in his office reading the weblog of the red-headed writer wannabe named Kathryn Kent. Kent is supposedly the mistress of Owen Quine, the famous author whose wife has hired Private Detective Strike to find. Kent refers to Quine as TFW, the famous writer. And this is one of the most important passages, I think, in anything that single passages in anything that Rowling has written. And like that burial scene of Mad-Eye Moody's eyeball, it's one that I think everybody just kind of rolls right over. Anyway, Kent writes on her weblog, great talk with TFW about plot and narrative tonight, which are, of course, not the same thing. For those wondering, plot is what happens. Narrative is how much you show your readers and how you show it to them. Here's an example from my second novel, Melina's Sacrifice. This is too good. As they made their way toward the forest of Hardarel Lendor raised his handsome profile to see how near they were to it. His well-maintained body, honed by horseback riding and archery skills. Anyway, this is...
Can we look forward to the audio release of Kathryn Kent, narrated by John Granger?
Seriously, the nightmare that Melina's Sacrifice will ever see print. I'm a little disappointed that someone in Strike Fandom has not put out at least a short story that incorporates Lendor with his handsome profile.
If I wasn't too scared to look, I'm fairly certain there's got to be something out there.
His well-maintained body, honed by horseback riding and archery skills. Okay, that distinction that the famous writer, Owen Quine, has shared about plot and narrative. Plot is what happens. Narrative is how much you show your readers and how you show it to them, is the syuzhet fabula distinction. And that's really what the shed is all about. Now, syuzhet and fabula, how do you describe that? Really, I would say fabula, fabula is the Latin word for the tale, the fairy tale, the story. And syuzhet is a word really for the narrative, the actual artistry involved. Now, but the fabula has a very specific meaning. Like if you have a detective fiction story, and the writer has to know how it all really happens on a timeline. How it really happens, as if there's a camcorder, and a house elf with a camcorder running around filming everybody's thoughts and thinking, and they get it in sequence on one film. That's the fabula. But that may be useful to the author to have as they start actually composing how the book is going to be told. Maybe most authors do that. I don't know. I think they did have to in some sense. But the important fabula is actually how that fabula is recreated in the reader's mind at the very finish, when all of a sudden it all snaps into place. Oh, wait a minute. Snape is a good guy. I mean, that moment when all of a sudden when all the syuzhet falls away, all the way the story's been told falls out, and you realize what really happened in sequence. That fabula that the reader takes away with at the end is the point of the syuzhet. Okay, the syuzhet is the setup so that when the fabula is the girl coming out of the cake. It's just like, oh, there she is. This and the syuzhet is how the story is disguised. So, for example, the first syuzhet in a murder mystery is what the bad guy sets up as the story that he wants the police to accept, so he gets off. Either he makes it into a suicide. Have we read a few of those? Or he sets somebody else up as the victim, or it's an accident. And that's the little narrative that the bad guy is running inside the story, and the detective has to look at and unwind that artistry in some sort of sequence to get to the fabula. That he has to find the fabula, the true fabula of the story. So inside every detective fiction, you have a detective fiction writer who's the criminal, who you have to find inside the book. Are you following this, Nick?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so syuzhet fabula is the story of, and is really the only way to understand all detective fiction, and that's Rowling's favorite thing, and of course what she's doing here in the Cormoran Strike books. She also says is what she was doing in the Harry Potter novels. Every one of those has a mystery, where it has to be unwound. The narrative that's been told, so you find out what really happened, the fabula. And so every Harry Potter novel, every Cormoran Strike novel is what Rowling understands the reader is doing and what the writer is trying to disguise by her own syuzhet. How the detective in the story unwinds the bad guy's narrative, that disguises the fabula, is actually the author's sequence of events and discovery, how he lays out how the detective or detectives figure out what was really happening. Right? And inside that syuzhet, besides just the sequence of revelations and how he finds out about this and he finds out about that, and oh, look, it was Colonel Mustard, but that all of those discoveries and that sequence, that's the writer's job. So that the fabula, revelation is astonishing. And the reader gets this break with their own thinking. That's the great gift of detective fiction, and really of all fiction, is that taking you out of your rut and having you re-examine how you see things, so that when you look at the world again, you're like, wow, am I seeing this correctly? Is this the fabula, or is this the syuzhet of my upbringing, my Freudian family romance, my beliefs, my prejudices, all those things? And that's the great gift of writing. Okay, Rowling embeds it in that passage where she has Kathryn Kent, who looks a lot like J.K. Rowling circa 1996, 1997. I mean, those interviews that she did at the time with her hair, the red hair frumpy, the mottled face, the jowls. She looked older in 1996 than she does in 2025. That's Kathryn Kent. That's the one beaten down. But it is a woman who understood the core distinction between syuzhet and fabula, between plot and what do they call that? Plot
narrative.
and narrative. Narrative. That the syuzhet and fabula of the Russian formalists is why we don't pay that much attention, Nick, to the lake. Because while the silkworm may be dying to put this thing in order, and the syuzhet includes all of this, all the tools, the symbolism, the chiasmus, the literary alchemy, all of the wonders of Rowling's work, to include narrative misdirection and narrative slow release. I mean, Rowling is the master of narrative slow release. She doesn't give you it all at once. You find out in the first book that, from that Wikipedia page in Cuckoo's Calling, that Johnny Rokeby got caught in a pregnancy trap by Lita Strike, super groupie, and Cormoran Strike is his child. And every book you get a little bit more about that relationship in that story. And we know that's got to be the finish, right? That's going to have to be what's in part 10. But that narrative slow release is the overarching story, the syuzhet, that is going to have the wondrous fabula of the ending, much as Harry Potter's defeat of the Dark Lord in the Great Hall was to the Harry Potter series. We learn about the Dark Lord in book 1, what, the house on the rock, Hagrid is talking about this. And we don't really understand it in its entirety until the Dark Lord uses the killing curse to try to kill Harry at the finish. That's syuzhet narrative control that is not to be believed, that reveals the fabula in an astonishing, transformative way for the reader. That's why the shed is what I've been working for 25 years, and why I've been saying, ignore the lady in the lake, ignore the lady in the lake. Rowling, is not ignorant of literary history and the way things go. And she knows that there are things in her life that inform her work that are important to understand, if only to see how she digests those events and presents them inside her work. And there are mysteries, of course, in her life we don't know. We don't know what inspired the Harry Potter novels, and that's going to be, the gem or the big news, I'm sure, of the critical biography, when we find out what inspired the Harry Potter novels, what crisis it was, because none of the ones we know about fit that. Yeah. And so Silkworm, because it has Rowling presenting herself in the book. I think Kathryn Kent is like Trelawney, is Rowling's not very flattering embedded picture of herself at a time in her life. Though I don't think she could ever have written, Melina's Sacrifice. And but the fact that she has an author talking about that, and that this is the famous writer told her about this. This is her understanding of her craft and presenting it to her readers in the context of the lake and the shed. And the shed is the important thing. And nowhere, not in a single one of her books, again, a novel about novels with a novel in it, written by the defining novelist of the age, she tells us what novels are really about. And how, as a reader, you have to understand them. What a powerhouse. What a powerhouse book.
Astonishing. Thank you, John. I really enjoyed that.
Okay, I hope that our listeners will go out and reread the Silkworm with fresh appreciation, because it's I talked about the 4 books inside the book, but it's forget the London literary scene and this and that. Just get to Rowling's, how she disguises Liz Tassel as the murderess through that book is, oh well, it's more like a spider's web. It is like this natural artistry. It's not a silkworm, but it's a beautiful piece of work.
Really is, really is. It's uh it's always been one of my favorites of the series, but I think next up is one that I've struggled to really enjoy, Career of Evil.
Boy, you love it or you hate it, right, Nick?
Yeah, I think
there's nobody on the fence about Career of Evil.
no, I think the more I've reread it, I think the easier I've come to it because I find the reading easier. Honestly, the first time through, if I knew I was coming up to a Donny chapter, I'd put the book down and I'd do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, those were the chapters that didn't have epigraphs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was like, oh, here we are
knew,
again, baby.
yeah, you knew they were coming. So what do you think you're gonna grab from the shed for Career of Evil?
I'm gonna have to talk about. I mean, here I talked about the shed. I didn't really talk about one theme or this and that. This was the shed front and center.
You chose the whole shed. That's fine.
That's good. But for Career of Evil, I want to talk about a golden thread. And that golden thread is violence against women. Because that's what defines Career of Evil, certainly on the first read, is. Yeah. I mean, Rowling said that she tried very hard to keep away from, she just wanted to touch up to the edge of violence porn. What do you think, Nick? Did she cross over the line?
I don't know. I was reading most of it through my fingers.
That's right. I mean, so I want to talk about that. The shed artistry there. I want to talk about just the violence against women. Just I'll do a catalog of it to say, and I give some context of it. I mean, we're going to do a post. We're going to do a Lake and Shed thing just on golden threads, and violence against women will have to be one of them.
Yeah.
But I can give a short introduction to that. What's the lake element on violence? Well, has Rowling ever experienced some violence?
I'm gonna go with a core belief, and the core belief is like you, John. It's violence against women and girls. And spoiler, J.K. Rowling is against this very much.
Yeah, she's isn't that like being against polio?
Yeah.
I remember when Barbara Bush or someone came out against illiteracy.
Yeah.
Oh, I just being bold and embracing controversy.
Yeah, there. You don't want to alienate the illiterate voters, do you?
I mean, seriously, that you have a problem.
Yeah, so I mean, it's common knowledge. We know that Rowling has been subjected to violence. So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover some of her activism that demonstrates, her core belief. And her core belief is that society needs to protect women and girls because they are subject to particularly male violence.
Yeah, I mean, we're giggling about this. It's not a funny topic, but it's become the defining legacy of her power period, and God bless her for that. All right, so you continue to say we're going to do this. No, Nick, I'm not going to do that. That's totally on you. I'm gonna put my hat on here and head out of my silkworm cave, and I'll see you to talk about Career of Evil tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, John. Take care.
Take care.